I never thought my life, at over 80 years old, would still hold secrets so dark that I could barely whisper them to myself. But I need to tell you, because silence has been eating me alive for decades. The moment I will never forget was the night when nobody was around and my stepfather drugged my drink. When I woke up, my dress was pulled down and shame soaked every inch of me. I didn't understand it at first, but weeks later, my body told me something even worse. I was pregnant, and that child, born of that horror, would shape the rest of my life. Even now, as I sit in my little rocking chair in a quiet nursing home, the memory rips through me like it happened yesterday. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to who I was before that night. My name is Margaret Louise Carter, though people just call me Maggie. I'm a pale-skinned, blonde-haired woman with more wrinkles than smooth skin now, but back then, I was a girl with long golden curls, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, not far from cornfields and old wooden barns, where everyone knew everyone else's business. My father died young, leaving my mother to raise me. She was a hardworking woman who loved me dearly, but she was also lonely. So when a man named Harold came into her life, she clung to him like he was a lifeline. Harold became my stepfather when I was just 13. At first, he seemed charming. He dressed neatly, always with his slicked-back brown hair and pressed button-up shirts. He opened doors for my mother, bought her little gifts, and spoke kindly in front of neighbors. To the outside world, Harold was respectable. But behind closed doors, there was something unsettling about the way he looked at me. I noticed it in small ways. The way his eyes lingered too long when I walked into the room. The way his hand sometimes brushed my shoulder when it didn't need to. My mother never noticed, or maybe she didn't want to. One particular evening stands out in my memory. I was about 15. My mother had gone to visit her sister in another town, leaving me and Harold alone. He offered to make us dinner, saying, "Maggie, you deserve something special." I remember how uneasy I felt when he handed me a tall glass of lemonade. The ice clinked against the glass, and I noticed the faintest bitter taste after my first sip. "Drink up," he said with a smile. "You'll feel better. It's hot out." I didn't finish it all, but I drank enough. The room began to spin not long after. My head felt heavy, my eyes blurry. I remember stumbling toward the couch, telling him I felt sick. And then blackness. When I opened my eyes again, it was dark. My throat was dry, my head pounding. I tried to sit up, but I froze. My dress had been pulled down my waist. My legs felt weak, and shame washed over me in a wave so strong that I thought I might drown in it. Harold was sitting in a chair across the room, smoking a cigarette, watching me, his eyes cold. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. I pulled my dress up, trembling, and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I pressed my ear to the wood, terrified he'd follow. But he never did. The next weeks were a blur. I avoided him as much as I could, staying at school longer, pretending to sleep early. My mother asked if I was feeling sick because I hardly ate. But then, my worst fear came true. My body changed. My cycle stopped. My stomach began to swell. I was only 15. I hadn't even thought about boys yet, hadn't kissed anyone. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. I was carrying the result of that night. I need you to imagine something. Being a teenager, in the 1950s, in a small American town where gossip spread faster than wildfire. Pregnant, unmarried, and with no way to explain it. I couldn't tell my mother. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me if I said my stepfather drugged me? I stayed quiet. I lived in silence, with the growing weight inside me. Not just the baby, but the secret. Harold kept his distance, but sometimes I'd catch his eyes on me. Cold. Possessive. Like he knew he had stolen something from me that I could never get back. The night I gave birth was the most painful night of my life. My mother held my hand, tears in her eyes, asking me over and over, "Maggie, who did this to you?" But I kept my lips sealed. I couldn't ruin her marriage. I couldn't bring shame on myself. So I said nothing. She thought maybe it was a boy from school, that I was just too ashamed to admit it. I let her believe that. But I knew the truth. Every cry of my baby echoed it. That baby girl, my daughter, was both my light and my deepest wound. She had Harold's brown eyes. Every time she looked at me, I felt love and terror all tangled together. Now, you might think the story ends there. But it didn't. Because Harold wasn't finished with me. One night, years later, when I thought I had escaped the worst of it, he came to my room again. His footsteps creaked on the old wooden floor. He leaned against my doorway and whispered something that froze my blood. "You'll never tell her the truth. She's mine too." That sentence, those 4 words, haunted me more than anything else. And that's where I'll stop for now. Because what happened after that night, it changed everything again. I often sit here, rocking slowly on this old chair, and think back to my mother. She was my everything, the anchor in the storm. She had soft blonde hair, much like mine, though hers was usually tied back in a bun to keep out of her face while she worked. Her eyes were a tired blue, but always gentle. My mother loved me fiercely, though I sometimes wonder if love blinded her from the truth about Harold. She met him after years of loneliness, and I think she was desperate for companionship. She wanted me to have a father figure. What she didn't realize was that the man she brought into our home was no father. He was a predator. But I didn't blame her. I still don't. As a child, I had known poverty. My father's death left us with very little. My mother worked at a local diner, long shifts on her feet, just to keep food on the table. I remember sitting at the counter, doing my homework by the glow of a single lamp, waiting for her to come home. So when Harold came along with his pressed shirts and his promises of stability, I could almost understand why she let herself believe in him. He had a decent job at the bank, drove a shiny car, and always seemed to know the right words to say. To my mother, he was salvation. To me, he was a shadow that darkened every corner of our home. My pregnancy changed everything between me and my mother. She never pressed me too hard, but I saw the confusion in her eyes. She'd hold my hand, whispering, "Maggie, baby, you can tell me anything. You know that, don't you?" But how could I? How could I look into her trusting eyes and tell her that the man she loved, the man she relied on, had taken advantage of me? I imagined her heart shattering, her whole world crumbling. And so I stayed silent. She assumed it was some careless mistake with a boy from school. And though it broke her, she never shamed me. She worked even harder, stayed up late sewing clothes for the baby, and smiled through her tears when my daughter was born. If only she knew the truth. Raising that baby, my daughter, was the hardest, most beautiful thing I ever did. She was small, fragile, but she cried loud enough to fill the whole house. I named her Grace. And that name was no accident. Grace saved me. When I looked at her tiny face, I saw both the pain of how she came into this world and the hope of something better. She was mine, even if she bore the features of the man I hated most. She was innocent. She didn't ask to be born from such cruelty. And so I loved her with everything in me. But Harold, he never let me forget. He didn't raise his hand to me, not in the way people might expect, but his power over me was worse than bruises. He would pass me in the hall, his lips curling into a smirk. Sometimes he'd pat Grace's head just a little too long, looking at me with eyes that said, "Remember what I did." Every kindness he showed my mother was like another knife in my back. She thought she had married a decent man, a savior. She never saw the way he stared at me when her back was turned. I began to hate myself for not speaking up, for letting him win, for letting him live under the same roof with us. The years passed, but the tension never left. Grace grew, my mother aged, and Harold remained in control. I tried to keep to myself, to focus on school, to dream of a future far from that house. I wanted to believe things might get better, that maybe Harold would lose interest in me as I got older. But the thing about predators is they never stop. I remember one afternoon when Grace was about 4 years old. My mother had taken her into town to buy a new dress, leaving me alone in the house with Harold. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes, when I felt him step behind me. His breath was warm against my neck. "You should be grateful, Maggie," he whispered. "I've given you more than any boy your age ever could." I froze. My hands trembled so badly, the plate slipped from my fingers and shattered in the sink. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him to shut up, to tell my mother everything. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I ran to my room and locked the door. Again, just like that first night. And I cried until my eyes swelled shut. You might wonder why I never told. Why I let him continue to hold power over me. The truth is, I was scared. Not just for myself, but for Grace. I didn't know what he might do if I spoke up. Would he hurt her? Would he hurt my mother? Would anyone even believe me? In those days, young girls weren't listened to. People trusted men in press suits over frightened teenagers. I didn't want my pain turned into gossip, my shame displayed in whispers at church pews. So I swallowed it. I buried it. And I told myself that survival was enough. But survival has a cost. Every day, I felt pieces of myself slipping away. My laughter grew quieter. My dreams faded. Even the way I looked in the mirror changed. I saw less of Maggie, and more of a girl broken into silence. Still, I pressed on. I raised Grace. I smiled when I could. I lived each day like it was normal, though nothing about my life was normal. The breaking point came one stormy night. Grace was about 7 then. Rain pounded the roof, the wind howled through the old windows, and the house creaked with every gust. I woke in the middle of the night to a sound outside my door. Soft footsteps. The floorboards groaned under Harold's weight. I held my breath, praying he would keep walking. But then came the knock. Gentle, almost mocking. "Maggie," his voice whispered through the wood. "Open the door." My body shook. I grabbed a chair and pressed it against the knob, my heart slamming against my ribs. He tried again. "You know you can't keep me out forever." I sat in silence, tears streaming down my cheeks. The storm outside thundered. Lightning lit up the room, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't going to stop. And worse, he was beginning to turn his attention toward Grace. That night, I made myself a promise. I would find a way out. Not just for me, but for my daughter. I didn't know how yet. But I knew I couldn't let him win again. But little did I know, the very next week, something would happen that would change the course of everything. Something that would force me to confront Harold in a way I never imagined. Because one evening, when my mother wasn't home, Harold walked into the living room where Grace was playing with her dolls. And the way he looked at her, I'll never forget it. The way Harold looked at Grace that evening still crawls across my skin when I think about it. She was on the living room rug, legs crossed, humming to her dolls, the TV muttering a weather report in the background. He stopped in the doorway and leaned against the frame like he owned the air we breathed. His eyes didn't soften the way a grandfather's should. They sharpened. They measured. They took. My breath snagged in my throat. "Grace," I said, keeping my voice light. "Bath time, sweetheart." I stepped between them like a wall that could move. I knelt, gathered her dolls, and gave Harold a look I hoped he'd understand. Over my dead body. He smiled, a thin, crooked thing that had no warmth in it. My stomach turned. Not again. Not my child. I ushered Grace down the hall, and I kept chattering about Bubbles and her favorite yellow duck, so she wouldn't see my hands shaking. I locked the bathroom door and sat on the tile while she splashed, my back pressed hard to the wood. I listened for his steps. I counted the seconds. I told myself I could be brave even if my knees felt like paper. When I tucked her in later, I lingered too long, smoothing her hair off her forehead, breathing in the soap smell, memorizing the hush of her small breaths. She blinked at me, half asleep. "Mama?" "Yes, honey?" "Why do you look scared?" I swallowed. "I'm not scared. I'm just thinking." "Go to sleep, okay?" I kissed her temple. "I'm right here." I stayed in the room until her breaths grew slow and even. Then I moved a chair under the doorknob in my room, like a soldier, setting a barricade. The house creaked. The wind pushed against the eaves. I didn't sleep. I stared at the dark and made a promise I could feel in my bones. I won't let him touch her. I won't let him win. Morning made everything look ordinary again. The sun threw butter-yellow rectangles over the kitchen floor. My mother hummed while frying eggs, a polka-dot apron tied at her waist. Harold read the paper at the table, sleeves crisp, hair slicked, as if last night were only in my head. "Morning," he said without looking up. I didn't answer. I poured Grace's milk and kept her on the far side of me, my hand always touching her shoulder, her hair, the sleeve of her dress. My mother noticed. "Maggie, let the girl breathe," she teased softly. I forced a smile and changed the subject. "Mama, I told Mrs. Whitaker I'd help with her laundry after school. She pays $1/4 a basket. It'll be good for us." "Us?" my mother asked. "Me and Grace," I said. "We can use the extra money for shoes." Harold folded his paper, metal sounding in his hands. "I can buy the child shoes." "I'll take care of it," I said, and kept my eyes on the sink. A low thrumming started behind my ribs, the same sound that always began when Harold inserted himself into our needs. My mother didn't hear it. She only saw a man who provided. After breakfast, I walked Grace to school, even though it was out of my way. I lifted her hand to the crossing guard like a flag. "I'll be here at 3, I told the teacher. "No after-school activities. No pickups by anyone but me." My voice came out firmer than I expected. The teacher nodded. "Understood." Only when I turned back toward town did my legs start to tremble. That's when the planning began. Not a neat list on paper, but a map drawn on the inside of my skull. Don't leave her alone. Don't let him find her alone. Save money. Find help. Watch the doors. Learn the times he comes and goes. Move like smoke. Think like steel. It wasn't easy to keep secrets in our town. People noticed everything from a new haircut to a late milk delivery. But they didn't notice pain until it made a mess in public. I needed one person to notice before that. I chose Mrs. Whitaker. She was a widow who wore her white hair in a soft roll and kept a bowl of butterscotch candies by the door. I'd known her since I was small. She'd pressed $1 into my palm when Grace was born and said, "For something pretty, like kindness could be stitched into a dress." She was the kind of woman who could read a room without turning her head. That afternoon, after folding her sheets and matching her socks, I hesitated with my hand on the laundry basket. "Mrs. Whitaker?" She looked up from her knitting. "Yes, dear? How do you know which people can be trusted?" Her needles paused. "You look at what they do, not what they say." "Why?" I opened my mouth and then closed it. The words turned heavy and hot. "Sometimes I get scared," I said at last, which felt like trying to describe a house fire by saying the stove was warm. She studied me for a long moment. Then she patted the couch beside her. I sat. She didn't ask the wrong questions. She said, "Do you need a place to go in a hurry?" The breath left me in a gust. "Maybe." She nodded. "You come here. Day or night. No questions." She reached into the end table and set a spare key in my palm. "You don't owe me an explanation to use a door." I stared at the small piece of metal, warm from her hand. My throat clicked. "Thank you," I whispered, and I meant it with my whole life. When I left her house, the sky had gone gray. I tucked the key into the hem of my skirt where the seam had come loose and told myself that was my first brick laid toward freedom. Harold didn't like it when I built anything he could knock down. That weekend, he offered to take Grace to the hardware store for a special project. He announced it at dinner, setting his fork down as if his decision were a benevolent gift. "No," I said, before I could soften it. "She's staying with me." My mother glanced between us. "It could be nice," she said carefully. "He might build her a birdhouse." I said no. I repeated. Harold's smile was patient and poisonous.
"Now, Maggie."
"Don't be rude. A father should spend time with his granddaughter." I looked right at him. "You're not her grandfather." The room snapped tight. My mother's eyes widened. Harold's didn't. He reached for his glass and took a slow sip. "We'll see how long your attitude lasts," he said softly, almost kindly. "You forget who pays the mortgage." Ice washed over me. I forced my hands to stay still in my lap. "We'll manage," I said. "We always have." After dinner, he followed me into the kitchen and leaned in so close I could smell the mint on his breath. "You think you can keep her from me?" he murmured. "You couldn't keep yourself safe. What makes you think you can save her?" I set the frying pan down harder than I meant to. It clanged. "Touch her, and I'll tell everything," I said. The word surprised me, bright and hot like a match. He chuckled. "To who? Your mother? The church ladies? The sheriff who golfs with me on Saturdays? Think, Maggie." He tapped my temple with one finger, gentle as a joke. "You didn't speak then. You won't speak now." He walked away whistling, and I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. When fear tries to root itself in you, you have to move. I moved. I took an extra mending for the seamstress on Main Street. I cleaned 2 more houses. I sold my yellow Sunday shoes and made do with a scuffed brown pair. Every dime went into a coffee tin I hid inside the flour sack, heavy enough that no one would notice if it grew heavier. I changed our rhythms. I walked Grace to school early and picked her up before the bell finished ringing. If I had to run an errand, she came. I taught her a game that wasn't a game. If I squeezed her hand twice, she squeezed back twice and stayed by my side, no questions. At night, I dragged my old dresser in front of our bedroom door. My mother scolded me for scuffing the floor. I apologized and left the dresser where it was. But monsters slip through cracks you don't even know are there. One Tuesday, I arrived at school a few minutes early to wait by the gate, the way I did every day. The cold stung my cheeks. Children poured out in a burst when the bell rang. Grace didn't come. My chest pinched. I scanned the yard, the steps, the windows. "Mrs. Carter," the teacher called, stepping out. "Did you send someone else to get Grace?" "Your husband said." "He's not my husband." I snapped, the words like a slap. "Where is my daughter?" The teacher's face drained. "Mr. Carter came at lunchtime. He said there was a family appointment." Grace looked confused, but he signed the book. Her voice faded as I took off running. I ran so hard my lungs felt like ripped paper. I checked the house. Empty. The park. Empty. The hardware store, no. The bank, maybe. I bolted through the heavy brass doors, hair wild, breath burning. The teller looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" "Harold," I gasped. "Is he here?" She pointed to the manager's office. I pushed through without knocking. Harold sat behind the desk, legs crossed, calm as August. Grace sat in the visitor's chair, clutching a lollipop like a handle to the earth. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Mama." I dropped to my knees and grabbed her, pulling her against me so hard she squeaked. "You're okay," I whispered into her hair. "You're okay." Harold steepled his fingers. "Maggie," he said mildly, "you're causing a scene. What are you doing with my child?" My voice shook, but I kept it level. "Showing her where good men work," he said, smiling for the benefit of the glass walls. "We were just talking about saving accounts." I felt power gathering in me like a storm. I stood, put my body between him and Grace, and lowered my voice, so only he could hear. "If you take her without my permission again, I will burn your life to the ground with the truth." His smile stayed, but his eyes flinched. He spread his hands. "Careful," he murmured. "Fire burns the one who lights it." I didn't answer. I walked out with Grace tucked into my side, hand on her back, heart beating against my ribs like a trapped bird. In the sidewalk glass, I saw our reflection, me fierce and pale, her small and clinging. I hated that he could make us look frightened even in a mirror. That night my mother tried to smooth things over with stew and soft talk. "He didn't mean any harm," she said quietly, wringing her napkin. "He just wants to be part of the family." "He wants control," I said. "There's a difference." She flinched. "Maggie, please. We need peace in this house." "Peace doesn't come from pretending," I said, gentler than I felt. "It comes from protection." I reached for her hand. "Mama, listen to me." But she pulled back, and her eyes filled, and I saw what I had always feared. If I told her all of it, every poison drop, she might shatter, or worse, she might not believe me. Love can make people blind in the exact shape of the person they need. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a list on the back of an old church bulletin. Not a map this time. A plan. Copies of Grace's birth certificate. Money. Enough for bus tickets and 2 weeks' room. A bag packed and hidden. Tell someone who isn't afraid of him.
Keep the key.
I folded the paper and slid it into my Bible at Psalm 91. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I wanted to. I chose my someone the next day, Nurse Helen Pearson, at the clinic. She was a tall, no-nonsense woman with short brown hair and a face that could be kind or cutting depending on what truth needed saying. She'd given Grace her shots and never talked down to me. I asked if we could speak in private. In the little exam room, I stared at the tiled floor and told a slice of the truth. Not all of it. I couldn't open that door yet without drowning, but enough. I told her Harold took Grace from school without my permission. I told her he had a history of disrespect toward me. I told her I was afraid. She watched my hands as I spoke. Do you have somewhere safe to go? Yes. Do you have money? A little. Do you want me to document this?
My mouth went dry.
What does that mean? It means if anything happens, if you need the sheriff or the court, there's a record that you raised concerns. It gives you weight. I thought about Harold's golfing and the teller's eyes and my mother's apron. I thought about the key in my skirt seam and the coffee tin. Yes, I said. Please. She wrote notes in tight, careful script. Then she looked at me and lowered her voice. You're not the only woman who sat in that chair and told me she was scared, she said. Fear is loud, but planning is louder. Come back if you need more help. When I stepped out into the winter air, a strange thing happened. The world didn't look safer, but it looked clearer, like the glass had been cleaned. Sometimes the worst thing comes on a day that looks harmless. The sky was pale blue and brittle. Grace drew snowmen on the fogged window with her fingertip. My mother had gone to the church to soar hymnals. Harold was working late. I let my shoulders drop half an inch. I made soup. I put bread in the oven. I turned on the radio and hummed. That's when the back door opened without a knock. The cold came first, and with it Harold's cologne, and with that the sour lurch of my stomach. He closed the door quietly and set his briefcase on the counter like he lived there. You're home early, I said, keeping my voice flat.
Had a thought, he said.
He glanced at Grace, then at me. A father-daughter dance is coming up at the school. Grace will need a date. My hands tightened on the wooden spoon until it bit my palm. She'll go with me, I said. They let mothers come. He smiled like he was humoring a child. It's a father-daughter event, Maggie. People will talk. Let me do this.
No.
His jaw pulsed. He took a step toward Grace. I moved before my thinking could catch up, planting myself in front of him, spoon raised like a club. It was ridiculous and also the truest thing I'd ever done. Touch her, I said, very softly, and I will ruin you.
He studied me.
The smile died. Something cold and old showed in his eyes, the thing that had lived behind his kindness all along. He leaned close until I could count the pores in his skin. You already did that once, he whispered. Remember? The room tilted. The radio crackled. Grace hummed. I didn't move. He withdrew a step, then another. Tomorrow, he said, picking up his briefcase, we'll discuss arrangements. I'll pick her up from school if you're feeling overwrought. The door clicked. He was gone. The quiet roared. I realized my hand was bleeding where the spoon had cut skin. I bandaged it in the bathroom, while Grace told me from the doorway that the snowman on the window now had a hat. I nodded and smiled, and felt something inside me shift from fear to decision. If he was going to try again, I wasn't going to be here when he did. After I put Grace to bed, I slid the coffee tin from the flour and counted. It wasn't enough for comfort, but it was enough for movement. I packed a small bag with 2 dresses for Grace, one for me, underwear, socks, a sweater, the Bible with the paper tucked inside, and the photo of my mother holding Grace on the day she was born. I hid the bag behind the winter coats in the hall closet. I put the spare key in my shoe. I wrote a note to my mother, and didn't sign it because the words trembled too much to make my name neat. I love you. I have to keep Grace safe. I will write when I can. Please forgive me. I set my alarm for 4 a.m. and didn't sleep at all. Every creak sounded like a sentence. Every car going by sounded like a decision turning around. When the numbers clicked to 4 o'clock, I rose and dressed, heart a drum. I lifted Grace into her coat without waking her. She snuggled into my shoulder, like she was still a baby. We stepped into the winter dark. The sky was a low lid of clouds. Snow began to fall in small, dry flakes like tiny white moths landing on our sleeves. The town was silent. The bus station was 6 blocks away. Each step felt both fast and endless. At the corner by Mr. Evans's barber shop, I saw a shadow move. Not the wind, not the snow. A man stepped from the alley into the streetlight. He wore a hat pulled low and a dark coat. My lungs stopped mid-breath. Harold. He stood under the yellow circle of light, as if he'd been waiting there all night. He looked at the bag on my shoulder. He looked at the child in my arms. His mouth curved. Not a smile. Something worse. Going somewhere, Maggie, he said. His voice was soft, and I heard the metal under it. You didn't think I'd let you take what's mine. I tightened my hold on Grace until she stirred. The snow hissed. The street was empty. The bus station's neon clock glowed 2 blocks away, like a far-off moon. I took 1 step back. He took 1 step forward. And from behind me, a car door slammed. Footsteps. A woman's voice, breathless and sharp. Maggie. I turned. In the half-light, I saw the outline of Mrs. Whitaker in her wool coat and church hat, clutching a pocketbook like a weapon. She must have seen my bedroom light through her window. She must have known. Behind her, another figure, the clinic nurse, Helen Pearson, hair tucked under a scarf, jaw set, eyes hard. Harold's face changed, just a flicker, but I saw it. Step away from my granddaughter, Mrs. Whitaker said, strong as a bell. Right now. Helen took out a small notebook and a pen. Mr. Carter, she said clearly. This is me documenting that you are attempting to block a mother and child on a public street at 4 in the morning after previous concerns were filed. Choose your next move carefully. Harold looked from one woman to the other. The snow whispered. Grace blinked up at me, confused. His mouth tightened. He took another step anyway. And then, from the end of the block, red and blue lights turned the snow the color of fruit and blood. A siren hooped once and went silent. A sheriff's car rolled slowly toward us, tires crunching. Harold lifted his chin like a man greeting an old friend. Morning, Tom, he called, casual as coffee. We've got a family misunderstanding here. The cruiser stopped. The door opened. The sheriff stepped out and rested one hand on his belt. He looked at Harold, at me, at the 2 women flanking me like wings I hadn't known I had. Maggie, he said, voice even. You want to tell me where you're headed with that little girl? I opened my mouth to answer, anywhere he isn't, but Harold cut in, smooth and quick. She's unstable, he said. You know how she is. I'm just trying to keep the child safe. The sheriff's eyes slid back to me. My heart slammed so hard I could taste metal. This was the moment Harold had always counted on. His connections. His calm voice. My shaking hands. I felt Grace's fingers curl in my coat. I felt Mrs. Whitaker's shoulder touch mine. I heard Nurse Helen's pen scratching like a tiny saw. I drew a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. Sheriff, I said, voice low but steady, I filed a note at the clinic yesterday because I'm afraid of this man. He took my child from school without permission. He's been warned. I'm leaving for our safety. The sheriff's gaze didn't waver. Snow settled on his hat brim. Mr. Carter, he asked. Harold smiled his banker's smile. We both know Maggie's got a vivid imagination, he said. Let me take the child home. I'll make some calls in the morning. He took another step. The sheriff set his palm out, stopping him mid-stride. Not another step, Harold. For the first time since I'd known him, something like surprise cracked Harold's face open. Tom, he said, a note of warning sliding under the name. You know me. I do, the sheriff said. That's why I'm saying don't move. He glanced at me, then at the women beside me, then back at Harold. "We're going to sort this out at the station." Harold's eyes went flat. He looked at me, and what I saw there made the cold feel warm. A promise, the kind you don't want. He opened his mouth to argue, and the world shattered with the sound of a second car engine roaring onto the street, headlights blazing, tires skidding, a door flying open, and my mother's voice cracking through the snow like a whip. "Maggie, what on earth are you doing with my husband's child?" Grace jerked in my arms. The sheriff turned. Mrs. Whitaker gasped. Nurse Helen's pen stopped. Harold smiled, without his mouth moving at all. And I realized, horror blooming cold and fast, that my mother had never understood whose child Grace really was, and that Harold had told her a story I could not outrun in that moment. The sheriff pivoted back to me, eyes narrowed now, hand hovering near his radio. I clutched Grace tighter. My voice wouldn't come. My mother stepped closer, face pale, breath a white cloud, eyes searching mine for an answer I hadn't given her for 7 years. "Maggie," she whispered, breaking. "Tell me he's lying." I opened my mouth, finally ready to tear the past open and let the truth bleed in the street if I had to. And Harold took that breath of hesitation and slid his hand toward Grace's wrist. I moved. The sheriff moved. My mother cried out, and Grace screamed. Grace's scream cut through the freezing air like shattered glass. It wasn't just fear. It was the kind of scream that makes the night itself stop and listen. I clutched her tighter, twisting away from Harold's hand, my breath coming in frantic clouds. The sheriff lunged forward, his boots crunching on the ice. "Enough," he barked. His voice was sharp, like a whip across a horse's back. "Everybody stay where you are." But nothing about that moment stayed still. My mother rushed forward, her hands out, confusion written all over her face. "Harold, Maggie, stop this. Please." She reached for Grace, maybe thinking she was helping, maybe believing Harold's lies that I had lost my mind. And Harold, he had the nerve to smile. That smug, calculated smile that said he was winning, that he had me cornered. "Sheriff," he said smoothly, "you see what I mean? She's hysterical. She can't be trusted with the child." The sheriff's eyes flicked from Harold to me. I saw the war in his face. He knew Harold. They all did. The town banker, the good provider, the man who slipped donations into church baskets. Versus me, the teenage mother who had carried shame in silence. My body went rigid. This was the moment Harold always counted on. But then Mrs. Whitaker stepped forward, her cane digging into the snow. "Tom," she said firmly, "don't you dare look at Maggie like she's crazy. I've seen the way that man watches her, and now he's circling her child like a wolf.
You know me.
You know I wouldn't stand here in the cold unless it was life or death." Nurse Helen pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the very notes she had taken at the clinic. "Sheriff, I documented this."
She came to me.
She reported her fear. "There's a record. You ignore it and you're complicit." The sheriff's jaw tightened. For the first time, Harold's smile faltered. "Grace is mine," Harold said suddenly, his voice cracking louder than he meant. His calm mask slipped. "She wouldn't even exist without me." The words ripped into the night. My mother froze, her hand halfway to Grace's sleeve. Her eyes widened in horror as if a candle had been snuffed inside her. What did you just say?" I felt my heart slam against my ribs. There it was, the truth he had dangled over me for years, finally spilled out into the open where no one could unhear it. "You've ruined everything," my mother whispered, her face crumbling. Her hands shook as she turned to me. "Maggie, is this true?" I swallowed hard, tears stinging my frozen cheeks. My lips parted, and for the first time in my life, I spoke the words aloud. "Yes, Mama. Grace is his. He drugged me. My voice broke, but I forced it out. He took from me when I was just a child." The silence that followed was deafening. Only the sound of snow falling on coats and hair. My mother's face drained of all color. She staggered back, clutching her chest, her breath ragged. And then, like a cornered animal, Harold exploded. He lunged toward me, his face twisted in rage. "You lying little—" The sheriff grabbed him, shoving him hard against the icy wall of the building. "That's enough, Harold." His voice thundered in the night. Grace sobbed against my neck, clinging to me with all her small strength. Mrs. Whitaker stood like an oak tree at my side, her cane ready to strike if needed. Nurse Helen's pen scratched furiously on her paper, even as her other hand trembled. Harold thrashed, his breath hot in the cold. "She's ruining me. She's lying. You'll regret siding with her." "Stop resisting," the sheriff growled, his hand on Harold's arm. But Harold shoved harder, his face a mask of desperation. For once, he had lost control, and he couldn't stand it. Then, suddenly, the sheriff slipped on the ice.
His grip faltered.
Harold broke free. And in that instant, Harold's wild eyes locked on me and Grace. He came charging forward. I staggered back, my arms tightening around Grace, my heart screaming louder than her cries. My mother screamed my name. Mrs. Whitaker shouted something I couldn't catch. Helen gasped. I braced myself, ready to take the full blow if it meant shielding my daughter. But before Harold could reach us, a sharp crack split the night, louder than thunder, sharper than ice breaking. For a moment I thought lightning had struck. Harold fell to the ground, face first in the snow, his breath knocked out of him. He groaned, clutching the back of his head. And standing above him was my mother, her polka-dot apron still peeking from beneath her coat, her hand wrapped around the heavy cast-iron skillet she had grabbed from the car. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes burned like steel. "Don't you touch my granddaughter again," she whispered. Her voice shook, but the skillet didn't. The sheriff scrambled up, breathless, and snapped handcuffs onto Harold's wrists. Harold cursed, his words muffled against the snow. I stood frozen, Grace sobbing in my arms, as the reality of what just happened pressed in on me. The sheriff looked at me, his breath fogging the cold night. "Maggie, it's over. He's done." But deep in my chest, I knew it wasn't. Men like Harold didn't stop. Not really. He might be cuffed, but his poison ran deeper than chains could hold. And I realized with a chill, this wasn't the end of the nightmare. This was only the beginning. The image of Harold face down in the snow, cuffed and snarling like a trapped animal, is burned into me. But the truth? That night was not the victory it should have been. Because in a small town like ours, justice isn't just about who wears the cuffs. It's about who people believe. The sheriff hauled Harold into the cruiser, his face hard but not unreadable. My mother stood stiff as a statue, clutching the skillet as though it was the only thing holding her up. Mrs. Whitaker's cane dug into the ice. Helen was scribbling notes furiously, her lips pressed tight. And me? I clutched Grace like she was oxygen, her little arms around my neck, her sobs rattling against my chest. "You'll regret this, Maggie," Harold shouted through the open car door as the sheriff pushed his head down and shoved him inside. His voice was ragged, wild, but it carried through the cold like a curse. "Everyone will know what you are." I trembled. My mother's eyes flicked to me, wet and wide, full of questions she hadn't dared ask until tonight. The sound of the cruiser door slamming shut snapped me back. For a moment, the silence seemed hopeful. But deep inside, I knew this was far from over. The sheriff returned to us, rubbing his gloved hands together. His breath fogged white. "He'll spend the night in lockup," he said. "But Maggie," he hesitated. That pause was enough to make my stomach twist. "What?" I asked. My voice shook, but not from the cold. "He's got friends," the sheriff said, his tone low. "Powerful ones. I'll write the report, I'll file Helen's documentation, I'll include the witness statements. But men like Harold, they don't stay down easy. You need to be ready for a fight." Mrs. Whitaker snorted. "Then we'll fight." Helen slipped her notes into her bag. "And this time, there's a record. That matters." The sheriff gave me a long look. "Do you want protective custody?" The words tasted strange. Protective custody. Like I was some kind of criminal instead of the girl who had been robbed of her childhood. I shook my head. "No. I just want to be safe. I just want Grace safe." He nodded, but his eyes said what his lips didn't. Safety, in this town, was never guaranteed. That night, we went back to the house. My mother didn't speak. She moved slowly, like each step was heavier than the last. When we were inside, she sank into the kitchen chair and dropped her head into her hands. I stood in the doorway, Grace asleep on my shoulder. I didn't know if I should comfort her or run from her, because the truth that had come out, the truth I had hidden for years, had cracked her wide open. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Her voice was fragile, like lace tearing. "I tried," I said softly. My throat burned. "Mama, I tried so many times. But you loved him. And I was scared." Her shoulders shook. She lifted her face to me, her eyes red and raw. "I brought that man into our house. I thought he would take care of us. And all this time," she pressed a hand to her chest. "My God, Maggie. My God." I set Grace down in her bed, tucked her in, and came back to my mother. I put my arms around her, and for a moment, we clung to each other, two women broken by the same man. But as I held her, a new fear rose inside me. If Harold had friends in town, if people believed him instead of me, what would happen to Grace and me now? The next morning, whispers had already begun. At the bakery, I heard two women murmuring while I picked up bread. "Did you hear? Maggie Carter made a scene," said her stepdaddy. Their voices dropped, then lifted again. "That poor banker, hauled off like a criminal." At church, eyes slid over me, sharp as knives. Some faces showed pity, others disbelief. A few women clutched their children closer when I passed. By afternoon, I realized Harold had already begun weaving his story. That I was unstable, that I had seduced him, that I was dangerous. Dangerous.
Me.
And the cruelest part? Some people believed him. At home, I paced the kitchen like a caged thing. "He's turning them against me," I said to my mother. "Don't you see? He'll ruin me. He'll make them think I'm a liar." My mother stared at her hands, her face pale. "I should have seen it. I should have known. Maybe if I stand up." "No," I cut in quickly. "You've been blind to him for too long. They won't listen to you. They'll think you're just protecting your marriage." "Then who?" she asked desperately. "Who will they listen to?" I turned toward the window, watching Grace chase her doll across the living room rug, her laughter like a bell. My heart tightened. They'll listen to me. They have to. And if they don't, my hand curled into a fist. I'll find another way. That evening, Mrs. Whitaker came over with a pot of stew. She set it on the stove like it was the most natural thing in the world, though her eyes burned with quiet fury. "They're talking," she said bluntly. "Half the town believes Harold. Half doesn't know what to believe. But me? I've got nothing to lose, Maggie. I'll tell anyone who asks exactly what I've seen." Helen came later, too. She brought paperwork, her documentation, signed and dated. "If this goes to court," she said, "these words matter." For the first time, I felt something like hope stir inside me. Maybe I wasn't alone anymore. But hope is fragile. That night, just as I was settling Grace into bed, there came a pounding at the door. Hard. Angry. I froze. My mother stiffened. Mrs. Whitaker gripped her cane. "Who is it?" I called, my voice trembling. A voice answered, one I knew too well. Smooth. Confident. Infuriatingly calm. "It's me, Maggie," Harold said. My stomach dropped. "You're supposed to be in jail," I whispered. "They let me out," he called through the wood. "I told you. You can't keep me down." Grace's eyes widened in fear. My mother gasped. I stepped back, clutching Grace close to me. My heart pounded in my chest. Because Harold wasn't gone. He was right there, back at our door. And this time, he wasn't going to leave without a fight. When I heard Harold's voice through the door that night, my blood ran cold. The sound of it, smooth, smug, confident, was worse than any nightmare I'd had in all those years. He wasn't supposed to be free. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near us. But there he was, bold as brass, knocking like he owned the place. "Maggie," he said again, his tone dripping with false patience, "open the door. Let's not make a scene." Grace clutched at my nightgown, her little fingers trembling. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mrs. Whitaker planted her cane firmly on the floor, standing by me like a sentinel. I forced myself to speak, though my voice shook. "Go away, Harold. You're not welcome here." There was a pause. Then his chuckle, low and menacing. "You can't shut me out forever. The sheriff already knows this is a misunderstanding. The town knows you're unstable. You'll ruin Grace's life if you keep this up. Don't you get it? I'm the only one who can protect her future." My chest burned. The audacity of it, of him twisting his poison into some sick claim of guardianship. Mrs. Whitaker raised her voice, sharp as glass. "You leave this family alone, Harold Carter, or so help me, I'll see every secret you've got dragged into the light." For a moment, silence. Then his footsteps, slow, retreating across the porch. "This isn't over," he muttered. And then he was gone. But his words lingered like smoke after a fire. "This isn't over." The next day confirmed it. The whispers around town grew sharper, meaner. People looked at me differently at the market, their eyes flicking to Grace, and then back to me with judgment I could practically feel pressing against my skin. "She made it up for attention." I overheard one woman hiss. "She's always been dramatic," another answered. Poor Harold, dragged through the mud. It was like walking through a gauntlet of knives. My mother tried to hold her head high, but I could see the shame eating her alive. She had spent years believing Harold's charm, and now she realized what he had truly been. That kind of guilt doesn't wash away easy. One evening, she finally broke. "Maggie," she whispered as we sat in the quiet kitchen, "maybe we should leave this town. Start over somewhere new." Her words echoed the thought I had been carrying in secret for weeks. Leaving. Escaping.
But how?
With what money? With what safety? I looked at Grace playing with her doll on the floor, her laughter soft but fragile, like it could vanish at any moment. I knew then, I couldn't wait for anyone else to save us. Not the sheriff, not the town, not even my mother. I had to save us myself. That's when the plan began to form. Not a desperate run in the night like before, but a quiet plan. A hidden plan. I started small. I took Mrs. Whitaker up on her offer for shelter and asked her to keep a bag ready for us too, just in case. She nodded solemnly, pressing her old key into my palm again. "My door is yours." I went back to Helen at the clinic, asking her questions about legal guardianship, custody rights, what kind of proof mattered most. She gave me pamphlets, advice, and the number of a lawyer in the next county. "Not here," she warned. "Too many of Harold's friends sit on benches here. But out there, you'll have a fighting chance." Each step was a stone laid carefully on a path only I could see. At night, after Grace was asleep, I sat by the lamp and wrote letters, drafts I might one day use. Letters to the court. Letters to the newspaper. Letters to anyone who might believe me. I didn't send them yet, but I kept them hidden, tucked into my Bible the way I had once hidden my list. And the money I kept adding to that coffee tin. Every penny I could scrape went in. When it grew heavy, I split it, hiding part at Mrs. Whitaker's house and part under a loose floorboard in my room. I didn't tell my mother everything. She was fragile, broken by her guilt. I needed her strong enough to keep the household steady, but not weighed down by every detail of my secret fight. Meanwhile, Harold didn't stop. He showed up at the school one afternoon, trying to chat with the principal about Grace's education. I arrived just in time, my heart pounding, my voice hard as stone. "She's my daughter. You have no right." The principal, caught between us, stammered something about letting the courts decide. My stomach turned. Even here, in the place my child should be safest, Harold's shadow stretched long. Another time, I caught him standing at the edge of our yard, just watching the house with that awful calm expression. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. When I stepped outside, he tipped his hat like a gentleman and walked away. My skin crawled for hours after. And the town, oh, the town fed on it. "Poor Harold, just trying to be a father figure," they whispered. Maggie always was troubled. It made me sick, but it also made me stronger. If they wouldn't see the truth, I'd force them to. Then came the turning point. One rainy afternoon, as I was sewing by the window, Grace came to me with wide, frightened eyes. "Mama," she whispered, "Grandpa Harold told me a secret." My blood froze. "What secret, baby?" She twisted her hands, nervous. He said he's my real daddy. That you don't want me to know because you're ashamed." I felt the world tilt beneath me. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the needle, and it clattered against the wood. "What else did he say?" I asked, my throat dry as dust. "That I should trust him. That one day, I'll live with him." Her small voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. "Mama, is it true? Is he my daddy?" I pulled her into my arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked. My heart broke all over again. Not just for me, but for her. The innocence he was trying to steal from her now was worse than what he had taken from me back then. "No, Grace," I whispered fiercely, though my tears ran hot down my face. "He is not your daddy. He is a bad man. And you are mine. Only mine." She buried her face in my neck, sobbing. And in that moment, my plan solidified into iron. Harold wasn't just haunting me anymore. He was coming for Grace's mind, her trust, her future. I couldn't let it happen. I wouldn't let it happen. That night, I sat with Helen and told her everything, every word Harold had whispered to Grace. She didn't flinch. She just took out her notebook and began writing. "This changes everything," she said firmly. "He's trying to manipulate her. That's evidence. If you're ready, Maggie, we can take this to court."
Court.
I whispered, the word both terrifying and liberating.
Yes.
"It'll be ugly. He'll fight.
He'll lie.
But you'll have us.
Me.
Mrs. Whitaker. Your mother if she's strong enough. And you'll have Grace. Courts listen to children, Maggie, even young ones. If she speaks," Helen's eyes softened. "It could end this for good." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Then we'll do it." But Harold must have sensed something, because the very next morning, we woke to find a note pinned to our door, written in his sharp, neat hand. "If you go to court, you'll regret it. You'll lose more than you think." The paper shook in my hands. My mother gasped when she saw it. Grace peered around my skirts, asking, "What does it say, Mama?" I crumpled it before she could read. But inside, I knew. Harold wasn't bluffing. He never had been. And now, whatever he planned to do next would be worse than anything before. And yet I also knew this was the line. I couldn't turn back now. For Grace. For me. For the years he stole. I would face him in court. In front of God and everyone, no matter the cost. The note Harold left on the door that morning might as well have been a knife. His handwriting, precise, sharp, like every letter was drawn with a ruler, burned into my mind. "If you go to court, you'll regret it. You'll lose more than you think." My hands shook as I crumpled the paper. Grace tilted her head, her bright hair falling into her eyes. "Mama? Why are you mad?" I forced my lips into a smile. "It's nothing, baby. Just some trash blowing on the porch." I stuffed the note deep into my pocket before she could see more. But inside, my chest was boiling. Harold wasn't just threatening me now, he was threatening my daughter's future. That was the last straw. I called Helen that afternoon, my voice steady even though my hands trembled. "I'm ready," I said. "Take me to the lawyer." The drive to the next county felt like crossing an ocean. Gray fields stretched out on either side, barns leaning against the sky, telephone wires buzzing above us like taut strings. Grace sat in the back seat with her doll, humming softly. My mother rode beside me, her hands folded tight in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since the night Harold's secret slipped out, but today she broke the silence. "Maggie," she said softly, "you're brave. Braver than I've ever been. I should have protected you when you were little. I didn't. But I'll stand with you now." Tears pricked my eyes. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's all I need, Mama." Helen drove, her eyes focused on the road. "He'll fight dirty," she warned. "Men like Harold always do. He'll try to drag your name through the mud, make the court believe you're unstable. But if we prepare, if we gather everything, you'll have a chance." I nodded. I've been preparing my whole life. The lawyer's office was small, tucked between a feed store and a barber shop. Mr. Daniels was an older man with white hair and a firm handshake. He listened quietly as Helen laid out the notes, as I told him my story in halting detail. My voice cracked when I described waking up drugged, when I confessed how Grace had been told by Harold that he was her father. Mr. Daniels didn't flinch. I've heard stories like this before, he said grimly. The truth is ugly, but that doesn't mean it can't be spoken. We'll file for custody protections, restraining orders, and we'll prepare for a hearing. A hearing? My stomach flipped.
Yes.
Harold will contest it. He'll try to paint himself as the victim. But you've got witnesses, documentation, and most important, you've got courage. Don't underestimate that. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, justice could be possible. But Harold wasn't idle. Within days, rumors spread faster than wildfire. I overheard a shopkeeper muttering that I was unstable and vindictive. At church, a deacon pulled my mother aside and whispered that she should talk sense into me before I destroyed the family's reputation. Destroy the family's reputation. As though Harold hadn't already destroyed everything sacred. Letters arrived, and signed, slipped under our door. Harold is a good man. Shame on you. One afternoon, Grace came home from school with tears streaking her face. The kids said my mama lies, she sobbed. They said Grandpa Harold is my real daddy, and that's why you're mean to him. I pulled her into my arms, my throat burning. Don't you listen to them, I whispered fiercely. You know who you are. You're mine. Always mine. But inside, fear gnawed at me. Harold wasn't just trying to beat me in court. He was poisoning everything around us, friends, neighbors, even my child's world. The hearing date was set for 3 weeks later. Those weeks crawled like years. Every night, I rehearsed what I would say. Every morning, I braced myself for more whispers, more stares. My mother grew quieter, worn thin by guilt and shame, but she never wavered in standing by me. Mrs. Whitaker came by daily bringing soup, bread, and steady encouragement. You hold your head high, Maggie, she'd say. A liar needs shadows. You've got the light now. Helen was tireless, organizing paperwork, talking to social workers, preparing affidavits. I could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't just helping me. She was fighting for every woman who had been silenced by men like Harold. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents spread before me. My Bible lay open at Psalm 91, the paper with my list tucked inside. My hand shook as I traced the words, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." Do you think it's enough? I whispered to the quiet room. My mother, sitting across from me, reached over and covered my hand with hers. It has to be, she said. Grace stirred in her sleep down the hall, murmuring in her dreams. I closed my eyes and promised myself I would not fail her. The courthouse was colder than the January air outside. Its stone walls seemed to lean down on me, heavy with decades of whispered verdicts. We walked in together, me, my mother, Grace holding my hand, Mrs. Whitaker with her cane, and Helen with her satchel of papers. I felt like we were walking into battle, each of us armed not with weapons, but with truth. And then I saw him, Harold, standing tall in his pressed suit, his hair slicked, his expression calm and collected as though he were greeting old friends. Beside him stood 2 men in polished shoes, lawyers no doubt, smirking like wolves. When his eyes met mine, he smiled. A small, cold smile that made my skin crawl. "Maggie," he said smoothly, "this will be over soon." I squeezed Grace's hand so tightly she winced. Because I knew what he meant. He wasn't just fighting for control. He was fighting to destroy me completely. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. The judge entered. Everyone rose. And as I sat back down, my heart hammered so loud I thought the whole room could hear it. I looked at Harold across the aisle, at his smug face, at the lies ready on his tongue. And I swore I would not let him win. Not this time. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and old paper. Every cough, Every shuffle of feet echoed off the high ceilings. My palms were slick against the polished oak of the table in front of me. I sat stiff, Grace's small hand in mine, my mother on my other side, Mrs. Whitaker and Helen a row behind us. I could feel their support like a wall at my back, but still, my heart pounded so hard I thought the judge might hear it. Across the aisle, Harold looked every bit the respected man. His suit was pressed to perfection, his shoes shined, his hair combed just so. His lawyers flanked him like guard dogs, whispering into his ear. He glanced at me once, his lips twitching into a smirk. It was the kind of look only I would recognize, a reminder that he thought he still owned the ground I stood on. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The judge entered, stern-faced, glasses perched low on his nose. We all sat when he waved us down. He shuffled through the papers before him. "Case of Carter versus Carter," he began. "Custody and protection hearing." The words tasted bitter in my ears. Custody. Protection. I shouldn't have had to fight for my own child's safety. But here I was. Harold's lawyer went first. A tall man with slick hair, his voice oiled and smooth. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is nothing more than a young woman with a troubled past seeking attention. My client, Harold Carter, has been a respected member of this community for decades. Banker, church benefactor, loving husband. He has always sought to provide for his stepdaughter and her child. Yet now, she attempts to smear his good name with outrageous allegations." He turned toward me with a mocking sympathy. "We sympathize with Maggie's struggles. But it's clear she's projecting her inner turmoil onto my client. And now she's using this court to sever the bond between a child and the only true father figure she has ever known." My stomach lurched. Lies polished into poison. I gripped Grace's hand tighter. Then Harold himself stood. His voice was calm, his eyes steady. To anyone else, he looked like the picture of composure. "Your Honor," he said, "I've done nothing but love and provide for my family. I treated Maggie as my own, and I've cherished Grace like a granddaughter. These accusations are hurtful. I believe Maggie is confused, misled by bitterness. All I want is to remain in Grace's life." He sat, folding his hands neatly, as though he had just recited a prayer. And for a moment, I saw the judge's brow crease, not in anger, but in thought. And my chest tightened with fear. Then it was my turn. Helen squeezed my shoulder. "Tell the truth, Maggie," she whispered. "All of it. Don't hold back." I rose on shaking legs. My voice trembled at first, but I forced myself to look at the judge, not at Harold. "Your Honor," I began, "I was 15 when Harold Carter drugged my drink. I woke up with my dress pulled down, and weeks later I discovered I was pregnant. That child, Grace, is sitting right here beside me. She is not his granddaughter. She is his daughter. And I have lived with that shame, that silence, for decades because I thought no one would believe me." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel once. I continued, my throat raw but steady. "Harold has spent years manipulating me, controlling me, threatening me. He has tried to poison this town against me, even told my daughter lies that he is her real father. He is not a father. He is a predator. And I am here to protect my child." My mother stood then, her voice breaking but strong. "It's true. I didn't see it when it happened. I was blind, and I let that man into my home. But I believe my daughter now. And I will never forgive myself for not protecting her sooner." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept going. "I'm asking the court, no, I'm begging the court, to protect Grace. To keep Harold away from her, from me, from my mother. We deserve to live without his shadow." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Then came the witnesses. Mrs. Whitaker, leaning on her cane, stood proud and unwavering. "I've seen the way Harold looks at Maggie. It's not the way a stepfather should look at his child. And I was there the night he tried to take Grace. I'll swear it on my life." Helen followed, presenting her documentation. Her voice was sharp, clear, undeniable. Maggie reported her fear. She reported his actions. She documented his attempts to manipulate Grace. I stand by her as a professional and as a witness. Each word they spoke felt like bricks laid on a foundation of truth I had carried alone for too long. Harold's lawyers scrambled. They objected, they spun, they called me unstable, claimed I was fabricating memories for sympathy. But the more they spoke, the more the cracks in Harold's mask began to show. Finally, the judge called for recess before his decision. My knees nearly gave out as I sat back down. Grace curled into my lap, whispering, "Mama, are we safe?" I kissed her hair. "We will be, baby. We will be." But even as I said it, I saw Harold across the room, his eyes burning into me. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something I couldn't hear. And then, for just a second, his lips moved silently in my direction. "This isn't finished." My blood turned to ice. The recess dragged on, minutes stretching into hours. When we were finally called back, the courtroom filled with tension so thick it was hard to breathe. The judge adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. "I have heard both sides," he began slowly. "And while this case is complex and painful, the safety of the child must come first." My heart thudded painfully. "I am granting Maggie Carter full custody of Grace. Harold Carter is to have no contact with the child until further review. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order for Maggie and her family." The gavel struck wood. Gasps filled the room. My mother clasped her hands to her mouth, tears streaming. Mrs. Whitaker closed her eyes in relief. Helen nodded firmly, her shoulders finally loosening. I pulled Grace into my arms, sobbing with relief. But across the aisle, Harold's calm cracked. His face twisted, his fists clenched, and he hissed so softly I almost thought I imagined it. "This isn't over, Maggie. You'll regret this." And in that moment I knew court papers might protect us for now. But Harold wasn't done. The fight wasn't finished. When the gavel came down that day, the sound echoed in my bones. It should have been the sound of freedom. It should have been the moment the weight finally lifted. Instead, it was only the beginning of another storm. The courthouse steps were crowded when we walked out. Reporters with notepads, neighbors craning their necks, whispers running like wildfire. I clutched Grace's hand tight, my mother at my side, Mrs. Whitaker and Helen following close behind. For a brief moment, the winter sun broke through the clouds, and I thought maybe, just maybe, the nightmare had cracked open into light. Then I saw him. Harold stood at the bottom of the steps, flanked by his lawyers, his suit immaculate, his smile fixed. He looked like a man who hadn't just lost everything. And maybe that was the most terrifying thing of all. Because Harold didn't wear defeat. He wore vengeance. "Well, well," he said smoothly as we approached, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "You've humiliated me in front of the town, Maggie. You think you've won. But court orders are just pieces of paper. Paper burns." A chill rolled down my spine. I pulled Grace closer, and Mrs. Whitaker jabbed her cane between us like a weapon. "Back off, Harold," she snapped. Helen raised her voice, loud enough for the crowd. "Mr. Carter is violating the spirit of a restraining order by confronting my client." People turned, listening. Harold's smile faltered for a heartbeat before he tipped his hat and walked away, his lawyers whispering furiously. But as he disappeared into the crowd, I felt it. The promise of another strike. That night, the house didn't feel safe anymore. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every gust of wind against the windows felt like fingers prying to get in. "Mama," Grace whispered from her bed, "what if Grandpa Harold comes back?" I brushed her hair from her forehead and forced a calm I didn't feel. "He won't, baby. The judge said he can't." "But what if he doesn't listen?" she asked, her voice small. I kissed her temple. "Then Mama will make sure he never hurts us again." Inside, though, my stomach twisted. Because she was right. Harold had never listened to rules before. The days that followed proved it. He started small. Anonymous letters slipped under our door. "You think the town believes you? They don't. You'll be alone soon." Then, slashed tires on Helen's car outside the clinic. Windows broken at Mrs. Whitaker's home. The sheriff shrugged, calling them coincidences. But we all knew. One afternoon, as I hung laundry in the backyard, I felt eyes on me. I turned, and there he was, across the street, leaning against a lamppost. He didn't move,
Didn't speak.
just watched. My heart hammered so loud, I nearly collapsed. When I blinked, he was gone. That night, I told Helen, the restraining order means nothing to him. He's waiting for the right moment. Helen nodded grimly. Then we need to be ready for him. Quietly. Legally. But also, in every way. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the rocking chair by Grace's bed, watching the window until dawn. Then came the fire. It was late, nearly midnight, when the smell of smoke jolted me awake. My mother's scream tore through the house. "Maggie!" Fire. I grabbed Grace, coughing as black smoke curled through the hallway. Flames licked up the back porch where someone I knew who had thrown a burning rag against the wood. The crackle was deafening, the heat suffocating. We stumbled out the front door, choking, clutching each other in the cold night. Neighbors rushed from their houses, shouting, forming a bucket line. The fire brigade came rattling down the street, water spraying. Through the chaos, I caught sight of him. Harold, standing at the edge of the crowd, his face lit by the flames, smiling. Not wide, not obvious, just that small, smug curl of his lips that said, "This is only the start." I pointed, screaming, "It's him. He did this." But when others turned, he slipped into the shadows, gone like smoke. The fire was contained, but the back of the house was ruined. Soot clung to the walls, ash clung to my hair. Grace sobbed into my chest. My mother collapsed onto the porch, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Mrs. Whitaker arrived, her face pale but her voice fierce. "This ends now. If the law won't protect you, Maggie, then we will." And in that moment I knew Harold had declared war. The next morning we packed what little we could save. We moved into Mrs. Whitaker's house for safety, her guest room small but warm. Helen helped us board up the ruins of the back porch, muttering about filing more reports. But I knew Harold. Reports wouldn't stop him. Nothing short of exposing him completely, dragging his true face into the light of the whole town, would ever end this. So I started planning again. Not just for court. Not just for survival. For the endgame. For justice. 2 weeks later, word spread through town that Harold was throwing a dinner party for the town's elite. A way, he said, to restore his reputation. Bankers, pastors, local officials, all invited. The same people who still whispered doubt about me in the marketplace. When I heard, my pulse quickened. If Harold wanted the town's eyes, then maybe that was my chance. Not to hide. Not to run. To expose him. I looked at Helen. If we could get evidence, proof, witnesses, all in one place. Her eyes narrowed. "You're thinking dangerous, Maggie." "I'm thinking necessary," I answered. Mrs. Whitaker slammed her cane against the floor. "Then let's do it. If that's the battlefield he wants, we'll meet him there." And as I tucked Grace into bed that night, I whispered a promise in her ear. "Mama's going to make sure he never scares you again. Not ever." But even as I said it, I knew the risk. Harold wouldn't go down easy. And at that dinner party, either his lies would finally burn or we would. The night of Harold's dinner party came cold and sharp, the kind of January night where your breath hung in the air like ghosts. His house stood lit up like a beacon at the edge of town, big windows glowing golden, laughter spilling out onto the street. To the neighbors, it looked like hospitality. To me, it looked like a trap. I stood across the street in the dark with my coat wrapped tight, my mother and Mrs. Whitaker on either side of me, Helen clutching her satchel close. Grace was safe with a trusted neighbor, far away from what I knew was about to unfold. My stomach twisted, but my mind was clear. This was it. "Are you sure?" my mother whispered, her breath trembling. "Yes," I said. He's never been more vulnerable than when he thinks he's winning. Inside, the scene was almost grotesque. Harold's dining room was polished to perfection. Silverware gleamed, wine glasses sparkled, platters of roast beef and potatoes filled the table. Pastors, bankers, the sheriff, and their wives laughed and clinked glasses. Harold moved among them like a king, his smile wide, his laugh booming. I stepped through the door, and silence fell like a stone in water. All eyes turned to me. "Maggie," Harold said, his voice honeyed but his eyes sharp. "You weren't invited." I lifted my chin. "I don't need an invitation to tell the truth." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "Not here, Maggie." Another whispered, "She's causing a scene again." But I wasn't alone. Mrs. Whitaker stepped forward, her cane striking the wood floor with each step. "Let her speak," she commanded. Her old voice carried more power than any banker in the room. Helen opened her satchel and set a thick stack of papers on the table, her notes, affidavits, the clinic records. "The town deserves to know who Harold Carter really is." Harold's face didn't falter, but his jaw ticked. "Lies," he said smoothly. "All lies. Don't listen to these women. They're bitter, confused, jealous. I've done nothing but serve this community." I turned to the crowd, my voice shaking but loud enough to carry. I was 15 when Harold drugged my drink. I woke up with my clothes torn, and weeks later, I was pregnant. That child, my daughter Grace, was born of that night. And while I raised her in silence, he smiled at you in church. He shook your hands at the bank. He donated money while destroying lives behind closed doors. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Wives covered their mouths. Men shifted uncomfortably. My mother stepped forward, her voice cracking with guilt and strength all at once. I didn't believe her then, but I believe her now. I saw the truth in his eyes. And I will never forgive myself for letting that man into our home. The sheriff stood slowly, his face pale. "Harold, is this true?" Harold laughed, too loud, too sharp. "Of course not. They've all conspired against me. Can't you see it? Maggie's unstable. Mrs. Whitaker is senile. Helen is biased. This is nothing but a witch hunt." But then came the voice that silenced everything. "Mama?"
Grace.
She had slipped inside without me knowing, her small hands clutching her doll. She stepped forward, her eyes wide but steady. "Grandpa Harold told me he was my real daddy. He said I should trust him instead of you." The room gasped again. All at once, the mask Harold had worn for decades cracked. "You little brat," he snapped, lunging toward her before he could stop himself. The room erupted. The sheriff and 2 other men rushed forward, pulling him back. Women screamed. Mrs. Whitaker slammed her cane down, shouting, There's your good man." Harold thrashed, his face twisted, his eyes wild. "She's mine. She's mine," he bellowed, his voice raw, guttural. "No," I said, my voice steady now, strong in a way it had never been. I pulled Grace into my arms and stood tall before the crowd. "She's not yours.
She's mine."
And so is the truth. The sheriff didn't hesitate this time. "Harold Carter, you're under arrest." His voice boomed over the chaos. Cuffs clicked shut on Harold's wrists. As they dragged him past me, he spat. "You'll regret this, Maggie." I looked him square in the eye.
"No."
"You will." And for the first time, I saw it. Real fear flickering in his gaze. The fallout was swift. By morning, every tongue in town wagged with the truth. No more whispers, no more poor Harold. The whole town had seen him lose his mask, his composure, his control. Papers were filed, charges pursued, and though the legal process stretched long, the court of public opinion had finally turned against him. For me and Grace, it wasn't just survival anymore. It was freedom. I tucked her into bed that night, brushing her hair from her forehead. She looked up at me, with sleepy eyes. "Mama, is he gone for good?" I kissed her cheek. "Yes, baby. He can't hurt us anymore." My mother sat quietly in the rocking chair, tears glistening in her eyes. "You saved us all, Maggie. You saved her. And you saved me from my blindness." I held Grace close, my heart heavy with scars, but light with hope. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Truly breathe. And though Harold's shadow had haunted me most of my life, that night I realized something. I wasn't the broken girl he tried to make me. I was the woman who fought back. And I had won.